Welcome to Tax Talk Podcast. I am your host Naimi. So today we will be talking about an important corporate tax case that has attracted a lot of attention in Malaysia, which is the cases of Watson Personal Care Store Holding Limited 2023. To discuss the drama behind this case, I have a panel expert with me today. Welcome Dr. Alia, Miss Natasha, Miss Najwa, and Miss Shafinas. What actually the background of this case? So in 2003 and 2012, Watson borrowed approximately USD 38 million from its return company Watson Labuan to finance the acquisition of share in Watson Malaysia with interest charged at 3% plus LIBOR. During the transfer pricing update, the IRBM argued that the arrangement was not at arm's length. So it is because the principal amount was not repaid. Relying on the Section 148 and the transfer pricing rule, the IRBM disallowed with the interest expense and substitute the interest rate with 0% resulting in the additional tax assessment and penalty. So in this case, the parties involved is the DGIR, Watson Personal Care Store Holding Limited, the taxpayer, and Watson Labuan Limited, which is the related company who provided the loan. This dispute was later heard by the Special Commissioners of Income Tax (SCIT) and the High Court. Let's straight into the heat of the debate. Dr. Alia, what were the major tax dispute between the Watson and IRBM, and how do their conflicting arguments shape this audit clash?
Well, Ms. Naimi, the whole dispute boiled down to the three major issues. First, whether the interest rate comply with the arm's length principle, meaning did it whether match the standard commercial bank rate. Second, whether the tax authority can legally use the recharacterization to disregard a valid contract and treat a real loan as a 0% capital injection. And third, the arbitrary substitutions of the 0% rate, which block the Watson interest deduction and artificially inflate their taxable income.
Let's be realistic here, Dr. Alia. From the IRBM's perspective, this structure was commercially irrational. Watson's Malaysia claimed massive tax deductions for interest expenses, but the principal loan sum was never regularly repaid. This violates Article 9 of the Model Tax Convention. No independent bank will ever let millions sit unpaid forever without a strict calendar schedule. Under Rule 8, Subsection 1, we have the absolute power to look at economic substance over form and disregard a transaction if it's artificial, substituting a 0% rate.
But Ms. Tasha, that distort a commercial reality, which is why this case is so significant. First, substance over the form must reflect how the real corporate treasury departments operate. Second, contemporaneous transfer pricing documentation is a taxpayer vital first lines of defense. Finally, Section 140A set a strict limit that the tax authority can arbitrarily erase the illegitimate expenses without a proper functional asset, risk analysis or market benchmark like the best lending rates. Doing that is completely ruin the tax certainty for the corporate investor.
So, Dr. Alia, how did the Watson actually defend themselves against Ms. Tasha's argument?
Watson actually raised the four agreement to defend their book. First, they proved their interest rate are 3% plus the loan interbank offer rate was perfectly commercial. Their transfer pricing documentation benchmarked this rate and proved it was actually lower than the Malaysia best lending rate at that time, which completely showed they are not trying to shift their corporate profit out of the country.
Lower or not, Dr. Alia, no independent bank will ever let millions sit unpaid forever without a strict calendar schedule. A loan that is only payable on demand without clear repayment behavior looks exactly like equity financing, not commercial debt.
That's why you are wrong, Ms. Tasha. Watson's second argument explained that the payable on demand clause simply mirror an uncommitted facility. This is a standard, highly flexible borrowing structure that commercial banks frequently offer to corporate clients for their cash flow agility. It's entirely commercial.
But look at the statutory authority. We maintain that the burden of proof is heavily on the taxpayer. Because Watson understated their income, the Section 113 subsection 2 penalties were a completely valid exercise of our statutory discretionary power. We didn't even need a formal counter report to challenge them.
But your exercise power must follow the law. Watson's third argument was that the Inland Revenue Boards of the Malaysia completely exceeded its legal scope. Under Rule 8 Subs Rule 2, if the tax authority choose to disregard a business structure, they are legally required to substitute it with a realistic market alternative, not just to cross it out and reduce it to 0%.
Our audit rationale was fully grounded. Public financial concepts from reputable economic sources like Investopedia fully support our stance that interest-only servicing is contrary to standard third-party credit behavior.
Well, the High Court completely disagree with your Investopedia screenshot, Ms. Tasha, because the public website holds the zero legal authority in the Malaysia tax law, and that's tied into the Watson final agreement. They successfully established a good faith defense under the Section 113 subsection 2. By hiring the independent tax expert from the PwC and maintaining the full transparency, they proved that there was absolutely zero intent to evade the tax.
Fair point on the evidentiary standards, Dr. Alia. To objectively evaluate which side was stronger, the taxpayer ultimately had the stronger argument in court. Watson's completely fulfilled its evidentiary obligation by producing a detailed expert transfer pricing report. Our audit team unfortunately failed to provide an expert counter analysis to challenge their local-based lending rate benchmarks. Furthermore, the High Court officially ruled that our reliance on Investopedia held no legal authority, and substituting a 0% rate was deemed an unconstitutional total deletion of a transaction rather than a fair adjustment.
Wow, what an intense and brilliant breakdown from both sides. Thank you, Dr. Alia and Ms. Natasha. So, Watson professional data ultimately defeat the IRBM administrative recharacterization. So, let's move on to the segment 3. Ms. Najwa, as our tax legal advisor, how did the High Court handle this clash and what was the final decision? What legal principle did the court use? And do you think this decision aligned with the real objective of Malaysian tax law?
Well, Ms. Naimi, it was a total win for the taxpayer. The High Court of Kuala Lumpur dismissed the appeal by the DGIR, fully upholding the SCIT order to set aside the additional assessment totaling over 4.4 million for the years 2010 to 2012. The court maintained that Watson's interest rate of LIBOR plus 3% was an outlang and officially ordered the DGIR to pay costs.
And if I can add a compliance perspective to Ms. Najwa's point, the court also ruled that the penalty was completely invalid. Why? Because Watsons act honestly and simply follow professional advice from PwC Malaysia.
Exactly, Ms. Finas. Central to this outcome was the total cancellation of penalty under Section 113, Subsection 2 of the Income Tax Act 1967. The court found that Watson had not deliberately submitted incorrect returns, but had instead acted with good faith by seeking professional advice from PwC Malaysia.
I see. That is a huge shield for taxpayer actually, right? So, Ms. Shafinas, as our compliance manager, what are the actual real-world implications of the ruling on future tax audit and investigation in Malaysia?
First off, Ms. Naimi, arbitrary 0% interest rate adjustment are officially dead. Under Rule 8, if IRBM thinks a transaction structure is uncommercial, they have to replace it with a realistic alternative. They can just leave it blank or completely disallow the deduction.
In reaching its judgment, the court applied critical legal principle regarding Section 140A. The judge noted that while the DGIR has the power to substitute a transaction price to reflect an arm length value, it does not have the power to simply disregard or ignore a transaction structure entirely. Therefore, adjusting the interest rate to 0% based solely on a definition from Investopedia was deeply flawed, as Investopedia is not a legal authority and cannot be used for formal transfer pricing analysis.
Precisely, Ms. Najwa, this shows exactly why keeping proper, up-to-date records is your main line of defense. Watsons won because they kept clear legal contracts, audited financial disclosures, and consistent payment histories. That's what proved their case under Section 102.
By knowing all this, what practical compliance and ethical strategy should corporate taxpayer execute to minimize these types of dispute in the future?
Well, taxpayers have to prepare detailed transfer pricing documentation every year when they plan transactions, and that includes a completed file analysis. Secondly, they need to write strong, detailed agreements between their companies with a clear business reasons. Basically, avoid vague contracts.
That's right. Furthermore, the court held that once a taxpayer provides a transfer pricing documentation prepared in accordance with the 2012 guidelines, the burden shifts to the DGIR to provide a counter transfer pricing study or functional analysis to rebut that evidence. Since the DGIR completely failed to do this, Watson expert evidence stood firm.
Exactly, Ms. Najwa, because that is what good tax governance is all about. Ethical tax professional will make sure that tax strategies match the real business substance. They won't rely on fake paper arrangements just to shift profits out of Malaysia into low tax countries.
And looking at the big picture, this decision is highly consistent with the objective of Malaysian tax law. It ensures the fair and transparent administration of taxes by preventing the arbitrary use of discretionary power while reinforcing the self-assessment system's goals of integrity and voluntary compliance. So by refusing to uphold penalties against a company that follow professional ethical standard and full disclosure, the law correctly punish evasion rather than legitimate commercial arrangement supported by expert advice.
There's also massive damage to your reputation and ethics. Aggressive tax avoidance destroys public trust and takes away funds the government needs for national development. Plus, any accountant or advisor caught making up fake schemes violates the MIA or MITA cost of ethics, which can lead to getting their licenses permanently revoked.
Wow, that's very interesting information. So, the legal compliance and professional ethics must go hand in hand, right? Finally, we are at the end of the podcast. Very interesting and good information we have today, right? To conclude our season, recent Watson case provide the critical lesson for the corporate taxpayer. Moving forward, they have three key compliance strategies that business should adopt. First, the business must maintain the robust transfer pricing documentation annually. By preparing a comprehensive report with solid functional and benchmarking analysis, serve as your primary sheet during a tax audit. Secondly, it is a critical to align with the intercompany agreement with commercial reality. The taxpayer must ensure that their related party transaction mirror the behavior of independent party in the market. And finally, companies should always seek professional advice to demonstrate good faith. So, by engaging the reputable tax expert to review transaction legally protects a company from heavy negligence penalty under Section 113, Subsection 2 of the ATA. Thank you so much to our amazing panelists and to our audience for tuning in. See you next time on the Tax Talk. Stay compliant, stay ethical, and stay sharp. Goodbye, everyone.